This is Continuum Drag, a weekly podcast revisiting television sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between.
This week, Outcasts, episodes 1 and 2.
We came to a planet where we weren't even sure if we'd survive the first days. And now, our solar engineers have given us energy. Our scientists have provided us with food. And our expeditionary teams keep making exciting discoveries about our new home.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast coming to you via Pulse Signal. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
I had typed a line from this show that made me laugh, and what made me laugh about it was I think it is indicative of how TV shows, at least I assume, maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't, of how TV shows have changed a little bit. And here's the line, and see if you understand why I think maybe the sense of humor and what is just a throwaway line maybe wouldn't be in a TV show anymore. Here's the line. Two characters are walking in a big line of people out in the desert, and the guy goes, "Is it true you prefer a big bloke in the rear?" Do you remember that?
Yeah, no, that was, because this is, we'll get into it, but I was just like, this seems a little dated for even today, which is funny, because this show's only 10 years old.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. I feel like things have changed, I think, dramatically in terms of what is assumed to be funny, in the last generation.
All right, well, let's get into it. It's a new series this week, Outcasts.
Outcasts. And let me ask you, have you ever heard of the show? Because I had not.
I've never heard anything about it. This is one that struck your eye somewhere along the way. What on earth, what were you looking at that you even came across this show?
I don't remember how I came across it. There's a lot of just, us Googling things and finding stuff and going down weird science fiction rabbit holes. But I saw the cast had a lot of people that I've recognized from other shows. It seemed to be, in terms of, a comparison of other things we've seen, it seemed to have a pretty high production value. It's a British series. And I was like, hey, it's a little bit newer. Maybe it was one of those that just, snuck under the radar.
Well, it did air on BBC One between February 7th and March 13th, 2011.
Mm-hmm.
So just celebrated its 10th anniversary. Happy anniversary, Outcasts.
Yeah.
And before we get into it, I'll get into what was happening in the world while Outcasts was on the old television.
2011. Now, were we watching another series at this time?
No, we've never watched anything in this span of time. I mean, I'm sure you were watching something on TV in 2011, but I don't know.
Not something we've covered.
Not something we've covered. But what was happening in the world was the Arab Spring was happening at the time, and the Egyptian president had just resigned and transferred power to the armed forces, so that would have been February 11th.
And it all worked out for the better. They didn't slide back.
Yeah, everything in the world is fine now. On February 22nd, Christchurch, New Zealand was hit by that 6.3 magnitude earthquake that happened. I'm sure you remember.
I do remember.
And then, 2-ish, 3-ish weeks later, the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami hit Japan at a magnitude of 9.0.
Yeah, is that the one that created the...
massive tsunami?
Yeah, massive tsunami, and then the nuclear problem and all that?
Yeah, that's the one. It was a bad year.
That was a bad year. That was terrible.
I was going through, I'm like, during the period of this little show, just two massive natural disasters.
Yeah.
And people were not interested in finding out what was happening in Carpathia.
Well, I mean, when you start weighing them, this, there's not too much pulling people into the screens for this.
Well, here's the IMDb summary for episode 1. Carpathia waits the arrival of a transport from Earth. A leader among the expeditionaries wants to break away from the settlement, and a secret lays beyond the gates of Fort Haven.
Yeah, I mean, that's vague, but I think it's accurate enough. There's something interesting about this show in the way it tells the story. I don't know if it's a primarily British thing, or if it's the time period, or it's just the style of the show, but this show really sets you in a world and doesn't do... The world building is very sparse. It gives you a little bit of information. You have to sort of piece together what has happened. Through other shows, there's little bits of dialogue and stuff, but you're thrown right into the world. The setup is not introduce. It's here's a bunch of characters. You'll figure out what their relationships as you go.
Yeah, that is certainly the case. It is very much just like ground running, and we'll see how this sort of plays out.
But it's the year 2060.
Yes, 2060. Woo, we're way in the future.
And you mentioned the planet is Carpathia, and the characters we meet are in a pioneer town, I would call it. I don't know if you'd agree, but I think it's kind of like a pioneer town called it's Fort Haven, right?
Yes, Fort Haven. That is absolutely correct. It is. Yeah, I mean, it looks a little more built up than you'd think of like an old Westy town. It's a little more concrete buildings with a big old spaceship that I guess is their town hall in the middle, but like very much a frontier town though, like in the middle of the wilderness.
Now, we talked about this when we were doing Earth 2, and we had spoken about what the potential for the second season of Earth 2 was going to be, and you had found a sort of in-house trailer teaser of potential. Didn't you, when you were watching this, feel this is very similar to what they had hoped the second season of Earth 2 would be?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I know there's definitely some Earth 2 corollaries because it's very much like new people on a new planet. But I had forgotten about that second season of Earth 2. But you're right. Like, this is certainly would have been very much in line with, I guess, what the proposed Earth 2 might have been.
I mean, a very different tone, because we should say this show, despite that little lame joke I made at the beginning of this podcast, this is a rather self-serious show. There's not a lot of levity at all. This is everyone's very serious all the time. And everyone, I had trouble sometimes hearing dialogue because everyone is whispering very intently and very seriously.
They also have some pretty British accents, which I think wasn't helping the situation.
That's true. There's most of the characters are English. There's a Scottish character. There's an Irish character. So you have to really, for us with our Canadian accents and Canadian ears, you have to really focus.
I had my subtitles on. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, did you? Oh no, I went for it.
The episode begins with the arrival of the transport ship CT-9 coming to the planet of Carpathia. It's like one of these very modern spaceships I think we see more in TV and movies. That it's like got those like, it's very sleek with those spinning hula hoops around it that I guess are producing gravity or something. Yeah,
it's funny. We've seen it a few times, the same sort of design. There's like, it's like a windmill type thing on the ship.
And I was very disappointed at the name. They're like, our ship's called CT-9. I'm just like, what? That's the best name you could come up for a spaceship, CT-9?
Well, there's a numeric system, I suppose.
Well, speaking of naming, the show has some weird naming in general. Why did they call the planet Carpathia, Jordan?
Oh, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it is the name of the ship that rescued the survivors of the Titanic.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. I thought that was pretty good.
I was not expecting that. Like midway through, they just like have a little exposition where like, we named it that because of the Titanic ship, and I was just like, huh, okay.
Yeah, but maybe I'm wrong. But if there was like a trivia question and someone had said what was the name of the ship that picked up survivors, I wouldn't have known it was the Carpathia.
No, I needed that explanation to know that too.
Yeah.
And like maybe you're right. Like that's kind of like a very specific reason to have named the planet that. And then you turn on the name of the town they live in is called Fort Haven, which is just like, well, you didn't put any thought into this one.
That's true. Well, they spent all the time on the planet. They're like, anyways.
I don't know. It's a haven.
I'm going to also give you this. When we're going to find out about disease later, they also don't give the disease a very good name.
They don't. It's true. At any rate, the CT-9 has been flying for 5 years from Earth to arrive at this settlement at Fort Haven. And I guess Fort Haven was established like 13-ish years ago? Is that kind of the general timeline?
They said 15 years.
15 years ago. And CT-9 is the only ship from its flotilla to have like apparently made the journey from Earth here. Apparently it's a very hazardous flight to get to this planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what we get to see is the president of Fort Haven, Richard Tate, played by Liam Cunningham of Game of Thrones fame.
Mm-hmm. Good actor.
He's a good actor. And
he's got a real gravitas to him.
That's true. He is very much a gravitas to him. And he's asking kind of the ship's captain about how are things on Earth when you left? We haven't received a pulse signal in ages. And the captain...
that was funny to me.
The show's very funny because, like, there are moments where you get exposition like, this is why we named the planet. But then they got, like, a flat-out question like, how are things on Earth? And the captain's like, not great. I'm like, what? That's it?
Well, yeah, I think, and I think there is a few lines of dialogue that imply that things on Earth, like as you said, are not going well. And I don't know if you caught it, what has happened. I don't know if it was war or famine or something, but I know that things on Earth are not going well.
Well, that's the thing is, he basically just answers kind of very vaguely, and the vagueness of it, I couldn't tell if the tone meant it's like an ecological disaster is happening or aliens have attacked. Like, I couldn't read, like, his tone could have been either one. Either one of those things could have happened.
No, but you're right. But again, that's what I think is going to be the style of this show, which is we might answer it later, but we're not going to have characters just give that info dump. That's not what this show is. This is you're going to have to pay attention, and episode 4, we're going to answer that for you if you stick around.
I mean, it's an interesting strategy for sure, and I found it particularly irritating when the president was like, "Hey, we haven't heard from Earth in years. What's happening?" The guy's like, don't worry about it."
I mean, it does sound like it's bad news, right?
Yeah, it's just like, you don't want. It's bad news. You don't want to know. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the CT9 needs some time to repair before it can attempt entry into Carpathia's atmosphere, because I really want to know what happened on that flight over this. It was a really tough flight, apparently.
Well, yeah, I think they sort of imply just that the actual journey sort of breaks down the ship, because that is what's happening. The ship may not have the structural integrity
plating,
to make it into the planet's atmosphere.
Yes, and apparently, they imply over the years other transports have arrived and exploded on entry, so they should be very careful.
Mm-hmm. Did they ever say how large this town is? Because I couldn't quite gauge it, because it seems from the far shots it seems to be quite large.
Yeah, it seems very large. It seems like a pretty reasonable metropolis in some ways, of size-wise. Mm-hmm. But then there are only 8 human beings who ever speak on the show, so it feels like there are about 8 people on the planet. So it's very confusing.
Yeah. There's a lot of people just wandering around, though. Peasants.
There's a lot of background, just stumbling by. Mm-hmm. Anyway, there's a moment, because there's this whole thing with the ship goes on throughout the episode. Basically, this is very much like modern TV, A plot, B plot, that are interspersed sporadically throughout the episode. And at some point, the people on the ship are so anxious to land after 5 years that they don't even want to fix the ship. They just want to die in entry. And President Tate has to give a rousing speech over the intercom where he gets a standing ovation. Yeah,
so I get that was the point, right? That they're so despondent. They're just like, what's the point? But would people feel that way after 5 years of traveling?
I mean, can you imagine? You traveled for 5 years. I understand you would want to get down there, but the ship's captain's like, well, we just need to repair the outside so you don't explode as we enter. And they're like, no time for that.
Well, and there's a second point in that over the course of this episode, the next episode, we're going to find out a little bit more about the ship and the people on it and the people escaping the ship. Spoiler alert, the ship is not going to make it. But they have a certain amount of, let's call them escape pods. I don't know if they call it something else on this show. But the escape pods, they don't have enough for the amount of people on the ship. And that seems an insane design flaw of the ship. The ship is humongous. Why would they have not designed it so there's enough people? Because you'll find out later there's not quite a lottery system, but there's a certain amount of people are picked to be able to be saved. And it just seems crazy to me that you've planned a 5-year mission knowing that it's very difficult to succeed and to not have the ship break down in some way. Why would you not design the ship a little better? But
well, it did raise the question, just if all the ships who've come here before you break down, but the escape pods are fine, no problem. They can do entry, no problem. Just build a lot of escape pods and then don't bring the ship with you.
Make the ship purposely break down the atmosphere and the escape pods just fall off.
Yeah, it did. There's a few things like this, when the captain gives his speech, you're asking, why do these people want to come down so quickly? Why can't they wait the 4 hours it takes to do the repairs? It's because the show just we need to give the president a big speech at some point. So I guess here's where it happens. And it's such a forced moment.
Well, not only is it a forced moment, but did it teach you anything about him that we didn't already know? Because I didn't feel that. It's he has, as I mentioned, a gravitas to it. He's well-spoken. He is rather terse. I mean, we already knew that.
Well, that's the thing, is they've already cast an actor who's already delivering all the elements they're trying to get across. So the speech brings you nothing further. You already, this actor brought all of that in the first 5 minutes of the show already. So it was just, a very weird speech that felt, I was just I'm like, whoa, you just really wanted a speech here, huh, writer?
Mm-hmm. Oh, and let me mention, and this is just an aside to everything, all the costuming is very similar to what we're wearing now. They're not wearing space outfits or anything. The men are wearing button-up collared shirts, just slightly modernized. The fit is a little different and there's no pocket sort of thing. But other than that, it looks like it could take place right now. There's no, fancy laser hats.
Yeah, the tech in this is very minimal. The big future changes are actually, it's very grounded in kind of a modern day. They're really trying to, minimize the science fiction other than the concept.
Right.
Also, not to rag on this poor President Tate all day, but President, you're the mayor. Come on.
I thought the same thing. I mean, to be fair, there's only one town on the planet. And so I guess, yes, he is mayor, president, and world leader, I suppose.
It seemed like a real overreach to me. I was like, maybe slow your roll there. Maybe you're Mayor Tate.
Yeah.
At any rate, all of this waiting around is done in the episode. Like, there's a second plot line, which we'll get to a little later, but there's a lot of waiting around as they fix this ship up so it doesn't get the chance to explode. And it gives the chance for the captain and of the transport and the president to, like, do a little bit of chatty exposition for us in this pilot episode. And this is where they talk a little bit about how the president's children have died when he arrived there, because when they got there, they apparently picked up a disease that they called C-23.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned. It to be fair, it does sound like a scientific labeling of something, of a disease, I suppose, but it doesn't give you anything like fun,
No, and it's really funny too, because usually that's where you bring in a little like spice to it. And I don't know if did you catch the only visible symptom of a child who catches C-23?
No.
Seems like that symptom was enough for you to come up with a better name for it.
What was the symptom?
The only symptom of a kid would show before getting C-23, was that they would suddenly have a glimmering halo appear around their heads.
Oh, I don't remember that at all. It's probably because they whispered it.
Yeah, and I was just like, oh, so the children get a glowing halo around their heads, and C-23 is the best name you could come up with.
So what do you think? Halo's disease?
Angel disease.
Angel disease. Angel dust.
Angel dust. Oh, yeah, perfect.
Did it.
The kid got dusted.
Can we call C-23 Angel Dust?
Yeah. We'll come up with a bunch of like little acronyms. Angel dust. Mm-hmm. They dusted that kid, etc.
Yeah. No, but now, is it only children that die from the disease? Because that's what it made it sound like. But he also mentions, so President Tate, or Mayor Tate, as you like to call him, had both children die from angel dust. But did his wife also die from that? Or is that just she died from a broken heart?
She died of suicide later.
Ah, okay.
Yes, that was. He didn't explicitly say that, but that was the implication. So after the death of his two children, she did not take it well.
Right.
At any rate, the captain asks, he's like, "Oh wow, all the kids died of a terrible disease. How'd you guys end up curing that?" And the president's like, quarantines and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, he didn't answer the question at like. If I was the captain, I'd be like, wait. Are all the kids I'm about to land on this planet about to die? Like, you did not answer my question of how you cured that disease.
Yeah, and this is the beginning of what seems like it will be a bit of a serialized story through this show, because it comes up again in the second episode. Not only what do they do about this disease, but also that there might be a issue with birth rate, and again, very similar to Earth 2, about children who have dying
populating
children.
a world.
Yeah.
When the repairs are finally complete, CT9 does finally attempt its re-entry, and they're like, we're flying over the new Pacific Zone and Upper Caledonia, and I was like, these names, I love it. Why don't we get to see these places? Why did you name these things but not like viruses? I don't understand.
Well, I'm assuming also it's just regions, because as far as we know, that's the only established town or city or metropolis or whatever. So that means they've just named parts of the world so that,
Yeah, they just pointed and they're like, I don't know, Upper Caledonia, I guess.
Yeah. It's like, is there a Lower Caledonia? Nope.
No. Oh, no. Well, we haven't found that yet. At any rate, of course, the ship is, of course, fatally damaged and starts exploding midair, as you'd expect, because, like, that's the setup. As soon as you met that captain on the view screen, and it's so funny, you meet the captain on the view screen, but you literally don't see another person of the, like, theoretically thousands of people on the ship. As soon as you saw him, though, you're like, well, he's dead.
Yeah, he just had that face of someone who is already defeated. You're like, oh, this is not going to go well.
It's like, this guy clearly was only hired for the day. And this is when they eject the 6 emergency sub-shuttles to save some of the people on the ship. And you get that, like, unearned in this show, very unearned, but classic cliched moment where the captain's just, like, going down with the ship and he looks out and he's like, he sees Carpathia for the first time. He's just like, it's so beautiful. And then his ship explodes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just like, am I supposed to feel something for this man? Because you didn't help me do that.
You're right. The problem with it is it's not earned, because it's a lot to ask of the viewer in a first episode, because we're just learning who these characters are. We're just establishing this world.
Yeah.
We're just trying to get ourselves situated. And they're like, hey, you should feel bad for this guy. And it's like, okay.
I've got 8 other characters you introduced me to, but I'm supposed to like really focus my attention on a day player that you clearly set up as a day player.
Yeah, it's like this guy's gonna die, but I haven't even learned the other characters' names yet.
It's true. Although I did like, it's like this is in the like secondary plot that's happening as the ship's like exploding over the atmosphere. We cut away and there's like there's a totally separate plot happening with the other characters, and those characters look up at the sky and like see the ship exploding, and they're fairly disinterested in what they see.
Yeah, so it is odd, right? Because what you really should be understanding is that you have a community that made it, that got through apparently quite a few obstacles to get there. Everyone else who has tried to get to this planet has not made it, so they are surviving at best with the supplies and whatever they've been doing, farming or agriculture. And everyone else who has tried to come has not made it, so they've had to go through this horror time and time again, and their real hope is these people arriving, and the ship explodes again, and no one seems that upset about it.
I think it's an issue the show has, and I don't know what it is exactly, but everyone's emotions are as muted as it is. Like, cause they're like, this is a very serious, grim show, but as a result, they've muted everyone's emotions so significantly that like they are like, I went back and rewatched it because I was pulling clips, and I realized the characters as they watch the ship explode in space are saying, "Oh no, those poor souls." But I'm like, there's no like. I honestly thought the first time I watched it, he said, "Hey, what's that?" And I was just like, "How could you not know what that is?"
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's a pretty good visual, actually. It sort of looks a little bit...
absolutely.
Like a large firework, or like you can see the explosion. It sort of had little trailers, streams come out of it, and you can see everything kind of blowing up. And it looks really... the special effects are good on this show, and they've clearly put some money into that. But yes, it's funny that the reaction is just like, huh? Like, we get more time with this child who is going to be... I'm sure we're going to talk about the B plot. This child who just keeps like looking at the sky and giving poetry. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's get into it. That's the other plot of the episode. Sort of the B plot, not the outside of the exploding spaceship, is one of the expeditionaries, a character named Mitchell Hoban, played by Battlestar Galactica actor Jamie Bamber, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and let me mention, as you mentioned, the expeditionaries or XPs. So for anyone listening, there's something that seems to be a little bit, it's not really explained in this, but you have what is called a protection and security team, or PAS, I think, PAS. I don't know how they pronounce it. Yeah, the
cops.
Yeah, so they're sort of cops, and for all intents and purposes, sort of, making sure everything's fine in this community. But you have these other people called expeditionaries, or XPs, and is their job, they're sort of more like the military, and they're going out and surveying things. Because there seems to be a bit of a power struggle between these two, let's say, armed militias of sorts, and they seem to maybe have different ways of dealing with things, or they don't know who's really in charge. Did I get that wrong?
No, you're not off exactly. Yeah, the expeditionaries seem to basically have been a group of people who go out into the wilderness. Like, it seems that like 99% of the population stays in Fort Haven, and only the expeditionaries are allowed to leave the fence to go wander around and like find useful items that might help the community. And this is part of the plot of this episode, is at some point they were like, very celebrated. Expeditionaries were like, people would gather at the fence and cheer for them when they got home. Like, they were a very, they were the big deal in town. As the years have gone on, people are just like, they're just doing their job, and people are just like not as interested.
Yeah, and this guy that we're gonna learn, Mitchell Hoban is his name. He comes back on what looks like a solo mission. He's very dirty, and looks like he's been gone for a while. We're going to find out he has a wife and kid who were at Fort Haven while he was gone. And he seems, I would say, disgruntled at best, and maybe slightly unhinged. Like, he seems like either this is how he was before, or his time in the wilderness, we shall say, was not great for his mental health.
Yeah, there's a question here, because what we're going to find out about him is he basically has a plan that he's been cooking up with these expeditionaries, basically to break away from Fort Haven and start a new settlement. Mm-hmm. And the show weirdly doesn't lean into the concept that there's like a political rift where people want, like, which makes sense to me. Like, I'm just like, I don't understand why they all have to live in Fort Haven. That doesn't make, like, why did you move all the way to this planet, and why don't you have settlers out there? That doesn't make sense to me.
I think it's implied, and maybe this is just me reading into it, I think it's implied that for protection, they all stay in this one area. That's why these are the only people that go out, because perhaps the elements are too severe or too extreme for people. Because, yes, you're right. You would assume more communities would be set up. But maybe it's as simple as the infrastructure can only, run electricity or whatever it might be for so far, or who knows what it is.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, it seems, it's just like, I guess for Michael Hoban, because he gets back and they're like, the president's outlawed weapons in the city, and he's just like, fine, I have to leave my weapon I have to leave my weapon in a lockup. Like, he's annoyed with all this stuff. He seems to want to be able to break away and have a little more freedom to, like, build a farm, or he's an expeditioner. He goes out there, he sees what it's like out there. But then they add this other layer where he finds his own mental health report, and it says he has multiple personality disorder. So I guess the real problem is he's, like, severely mentally ill.
Yes, you're right. I know what you're driving at, is that there is an interesting idea here of just the inherent political factions that can develop in such a high stress situation, but they want to make you sure right away he's going to be the bad guy, is what it is. Not that there's actually two views that might have some merit in them, because like he seems like, here's the thing, he's a good actor, he's an attractive actor. He's his character seems kind of cool and stuff. So you're like, oh, maybe this will be a guy to root for. But then immediately he, like, while having a conversation with his wife, he like grabs her by the throat and stuff, and he's like very aggressive and violent. And you're like, oh no, he's a bad guy. So all his views are wrong.
Yeah. Well, and even when he goes to talk to the expeditionaries about, like, he's going to move up the plan, they're going to break away from the settlement sooner. Which this is also something that was, like, a little too much for me. But, like, there's, an expeditionary force, a whole group of individuals who, like, work this job. There is only one of those individuals, Jack, who is allowed to deliver lines. So, like, he has to speak for, like, what is, like, I guess the entire organization in this show.
Yeah. Well, it is the problem you kind of mentioned, that they already do have a lot of characters, so they each have to have, there's only a finite amount of time they can all have a conversation, but it does sometimes hurt the scope of what the world is supposed to be, because they don't even have a character have any line. It's just like, hey, there's a pack of 20 guys. What do they think? Let's hear what Jack says.
Jack Holt will answer for them.
Yeah.
At any rate, he also is just like, hey, let's not do it. We're not ready to move out yet. And so he does also mention to Jack, or Jack mentions to Mitchell as they're having this conversation about whether they should leave or not. He's like, oh, FYI, your wife has been spying on you for the president.
Yeah, which is true.
And so what happens is a dust storm hits the capital of Fort Haven, a whiteout, if you will, I believe they call it. Mm-hmm. And this whiteout, it is just like a dust storm. It looks like from, like, the 1930s or something blows in. And his wife is, I guess, one of the protection and security officers, a police officer who's trying to break up a drug deal that's going on. And as the storm blows in, she's lost in the haze of the storm. And it's supposed to be a mystery, but, like, I immediately recognized it was her husband doing this. But her husband shows up and beats her into a coma.
Yeah, it's a pretty violent scene, because it's there's a dust storm. I mean, I thought it was filmed pretty well, but yes, everyone knows it's the husband. She's in the dust, and he's like, I think it's a brick or something he's hitting her with, some piece of rubble, over and over. And her partner, who we haven't mentioned yet, her partner is named
Fleur.
Fleur, yes. What's her last name? Fleur Morgan. She sort of runs to her and gets to her, but the attacker, who we know is the husband, has gotten away. And this now character, who I can't remember the wife's name. It doesn't really matter because she's going to be in a coma the whole time, but she is now in a coma.
Yeah, she's now in a coma. Her son is his only parent now is his multiple personality father, Mitchell.
Yeah.
And this is basically where it becomes like the Protection and Service Force joins in, because they're like, we have to investigate who beat up this officer, which is, fine, but we as an audience already kind of have a pretty good idea. But we get into the investigation where we're going to meet more characters, basically. And it's like we get to meet the head of the Protection and Security Force, a character named Stella Issen, who unfortunately, this is where it kind of correlates to Earth 2 a little too much, is like she kind of is supposed to be the leader of the police force.
I know what you're going to say.
Her only interest is her husband and her daughter, who are maybe on Earth or maybe on their way here. It's all she talks about. She ignores her job perpetually to talk about it. And you're just like, you've created a character who's the head of the security force, but you have her only interested in one thing, and it is like being a mom.
And you're not even exaggerating. I noticed it probably the third scene with her, and I understand what they're trying to do. They are trying to show that normally she is very focused, she's very driven, she's very good at her job, but because the possibility of her husband and daughter coming back is kind of throw her emotions out. But it does sort of become this annoying trope for a female character that they can only care about their family. And it's quite literally every single scene. She's
Yeah.
either asking about her kid or talking about her kid or unable to do her job because of her kid, or being inappropriate and asking someone about her kid. And and we should mention, she left, I think, when the kid was 5 or so.
Yes,
and the
5 or
kid,
yeah, it must
and
be
now the
5.
kid's 18 or something like that.
Yeah, so she hasn't seen this daughter in a long time. Spoiler alert: she will be on that ship with the husband.
Actually, I
won't
think
be?
the daughter was 3. I think she daughter was 3 when she left, and now it's been 15 years. So that math adds up.
We also get to meet which is just part of the issue of the show, is that like that's the head of security. So you need police who work for her. So she has a whole police force, but we only like 2 of them. We're only ever going to meet 2 of them. 2 of them are her lead investigators who handle all possible cases.
Yeah.
And that is the aforementioned Fleur Morgan.
Yeah, and Cass Cromwell.
And Cass Cromwell, who is a weird character. Like, I think I really like the actor playing him. He's very watchable. I was just like, this guy's like the one giving a star turn in this show.
Mm-hmm.
However, he is playing a character that we've seen since like probably Tech War, in which he is like, he's a homophobic misogynist, but the fun kind.
I don't know. Do you think that's what he is?
Well, he made the homophobic joke about
true.
taking a man in the butt,
Yeah.
which was like, I'm like, what? And then he constantly is talking, like, anytime he's with Fleur, they have an argument about the roles of men and women, and he's like, men need to run things in this town. It's just like what am I, like, the actors do, like, and we've seen it before, like, an actor can really bring something to the role, but it's just like, it's such a thankless role of just like, if you had a worse actor, this would be a villain.
Yeah, fair enough. But they do sort of, what you're going to learn is that after, I can't remember her name is, she's in a coma, they sort of, Fleur and Cass sort of get thrown together as like the sort of new partner team.
Yeah, they've got to solve this crime.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sad because I don't think we'll ever see it again. But when we're introduced to Cass Cromwell, he's walking a pig on a leash, and
That's
I was
right.
Like,
Yeah,
I hope this is his character trait.
Well, it's the reason it's there is because it's hinting at another thing that I think will be a serialized element, which is cloning. And he mentions that it's a cloned livestock, and that's something that they should be doing because of the limitations they have in Fort Haven.
Yeah. He'd confiscated this illegal clone of a pig because people were making it for bacon.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they bring in that drug dealer who was there, who when Fleur was when the wife was beat up in the whiteout, they bring him in and they're asking him questions and like, did you do it? Did you beat her up? And he consents to having a quote deep brain scan or DBV to prove he didn't do it.
They say DBV a lot, and what it is Stella is able to read the brainwaves in some sense. I don't exactly know how it works. Maybe you can explain it. But what it looks like is 2 sort of large metal blocks that go on your ears, sort of like a vice of sorts, and then it's like shooting lasers into your head, and I guess
like
reading your mind.
Your brain. Yeah, and then it visualizes your memories, I guess, is what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, so it's some sort of investigative tool. I don't really know how it works, and it almost seems like it's too powerful because it seems like you can solve any crime with it, but they're going to go back to it several times in the next 2 episodes.
Yeah, it's a funny idea, and like it reminded me a little bit of what was that one in Seattle where the guy could change things with his brain, and the guy kept like building things to like scan his head.
What was this?
That TV movie we watched where the guy could anytime he had a dream, it changed the world.
Oh yeah, the Ursula Le Guin one.
Yeah, it kind of like that. It kind of had that flavor to it.
Yes, it did.
But it like as a police investigative tool, as everyone knows, memory is so fallible. Like it's not actually that helpful. Like it's okay, but like they're using it as like a lie detector test. Like, we're gonna put you in here and look at your memories, and that'll tell us the truth.
You're right. They're using it as the smoking gun, but you're right. Memories are infallible and maybe not the greatest tool, but they use it sort of as a. It seems like it's a last resort, is what she's sort of, because it seems like no one wants to do it, and
yeah, you have to get consent. You can't just do it to somebody.
That's right.
But Stella, who runs it, the head of protection services, she's the one who runs the machine. She also uses it in her off hours to remember the time she went to the opera with her husband when she was pregnant.
It's true. This, it's so funny. We've watched so many of these science fiction shows, so you start seeing tropes or similarities or themes that you see over and over. And this reminded me a lot of Sleepwalkers, of the guy going into his sleep device to constantly remember his wife in the dreamscape. That's what this felt like to me, is that Stella's going into her own dreamscape to remember her husband. I was like, of course, that's her character.
Well, and I'm like, does that I mean, it must. I guess the implication is it must elevate the emotions you feel when you have that memory. But I'm just like, you're just like you'd be able to remember it without the machine. I don't understand.
Yeah, and I think what they're implying is not so much that you're remembering, but I think you almost like a virtual reality. You are experiencing it once again. Right. I think that's what they're implying. They don't come out and say it, but that's what I was led to believe.
Well, I mean, and this is nitpicky as always, but one of my favorite things was every time they show you the visualization on the screen of what the person's remembering, it's from the third person. The person doesn't like remember it from their own point of view. They remember it from the third person.
That is funny.
And also, I guess also when you use it, because what happens is Stella will go use it on herself to remember this opera night. And then when she gets finished with it, she's, I guess, in the mood. So she goes to the bar and goes and has sex with that drug dealer.
Is that what she does?
Yeah, she like leaves. We see her do that thing, and then we see her go to the bar, and she bumps into that drug dealer at the bar.
Yeah, the Irish
She's
guy.
like, "You want to get out of here?" And he's just like, "Okay."
Yeah, well, like, I didn't know if that's what it was. I had assumed there was some sort of past relationship. I didn't know it was still going on, but maybe you're right.
Well, it's because later he'll come by. I think in an episode later he'll come by and be like, "Hey," he's like, "You haven't called me since that first time last night." Like I'm just like, so that was it was very weird. I was just like, all right, whatever. Like her whole character is like, I miss my family, and so I'm lonely. So I went to the bar to pick up the drug deal. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah,
we don't get a lot of internal insight into a lot of these characters, so it's tough to know what's driving them to make these choices.
And I'll admit, I probably missed 10 to 15% of dialogue because everyone is speaking like this at all times. I'm very upset about this thing.
Anyway, this cast and floor, the cops, they go wandering around trying to find Mitchell and just endlessly discussing how Mitchell's such a pillar of the community and everybody loves him.
He's a hero of sorts.
And it's a problem the show has. Like, it's the same thing with Stella. Is like everyone stands around telling you how good they are, what a great character they are. You love them, but all we ever see them do is the opposite of that. So you're like, all we get is tell. We get zero show.
Well, I think you're supposed to understand that it's been established that Mitchell was one way and now he's acting another way and something has happened. However, they just mentioned that he had multiple personalities. Isn't that what they said?
Yeah.
So that would have manifested itself previously.
And it's something they do. It's a way to shorthand oh, this person's too important. We can't just drag him into the police station. But I'm just like, yeah, well, he beat his wife to death, so I think you can. But they're like, no, but everyone in this city, all 8 people of us, we'd be so mad if we did. I'm like, would they? I can't tell.
And we have to make it clear again. This show, doesn't seem to be a huge rush or momentum to to get him. It's like, well, we're going to find him. But it's like, he's brutally possibly murdered someone. He's a dangerous person. You should get him right away. And they're like, all right, I guess we'll get on it. Put on the backpack.
Well, there's only 2 cops, so we can only send 2 of them to go looking for him. The rest of them have to go sit in the office.
Yeah.
And, of course, Mitchell, while they're looking for him, corners the president in the middle of, I guess, City Hall and, pulls a gun. I'm just like, there's no one protecting the president.
Yeah, he, grabs, Mitchell grabs, what's the president's name? Richard... Tate. He grabs Tate and sort of pins him against a wall, and you kind of have him, he's like, you're a traitor, and they give some sort of implication that he betrayed him of some sort.
Well, and they tease, they're like, you told me to execute those people, but I didn't do it. They're still out there in the wild. And you're like, oh, mystery. Yeah. Just because the thing is, too, it's just I get the idea of teasing things out, but I think the show teases too much. I'm just like, you can tell us who these people are. I don't need you to be like, oh, there's somebody out there that we were going to execute, but we didn't. Who are they? I'm like, just say it. I don't want to tune in next week.
It didn't bother me as much as it bothered you. I was kind of fine with them, the style of that. It wasn't
too much of it for me.
Do you think
it was too much minor teasing of a conflict, but not committing to what that conflict was.
See, for me, it wasn't that the teasing was an issue. What it was for me was that when you do finally see these people, whatever, it's not that much of a payoff.
Yeah, well, that's why tease such a minor payoff?
Yeah.
There was no payoff to have. Anyway, Mitchell runs away from the president, shoots some dude on his way out, kidnaps his son, and then runs off into the wilderness, and the cops failed to catch him in the city.
Yeah, so, and what you're going to get is a series of scenes of him being sort of sweet with his son and sort of being a little bit creepy and domineering.
The one time he thinks about murdering him.
Yeah, there's he sort of vacillates between the two. And but it's like, what's odd to me is that he seemed to have previously has sort of like had plans of what this community is going to be like and where they're going to live and stuff. But then when he takes his kid, it's just like they're wandering around. I'm like, did you not plan a place to go or something better? Like, it just seems like
he builds a lean-to and they're like sleeping here.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, you just were out forever planning this new community. Did you not find somewhere to go? Like, it just seemed like they were randomly walking around.
Like, wouldn't you have, if you're out there all the time and you're planning this eventual breakaway, wouldn't you have built a cabin already?
Yeah, or something. But anyways, it's more like, like a lean-to or something that's going to fall over in a couple days.
Yeah. And his son can't believe it. He's seeing a lake for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Which is weird that they've never even left, like, for a day.
That's
trip.
What's so weird. It's like such a police state, it feels like, back in Fort Haven.
Well, but you know what? You're not wrong, because there's something interesting there that maybe this show's going to lean into, maybe it's not, is that we're supposed to like Tate for some reason, just because, but maybe he is being very militaristic or very autocratic and he's running things with an iron fist. We do find that Mitchell doesn't like that guns have been taken out of the town, whatever you feel about that, but there is a sort of top-down administration here that this show doesn't really, or at least hasn't talked about yet. These sort of ideas of, maybe this is a bit of a militaristic state.
Yeah, like can't even leave Fort Haven and have a picnic? Come on, Mayor Tate. At any rate, Cass and Fleur, of course, get permission to leave the city for the first time ever to go, like, track down Mitchell. And, like, they camp out one night, and there's a real, like, oh, is Cass in love with Fleur? I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to play with that a little bit, and I think really what it is, hey, she's really pretty, right? And you're like, yep, she is really pretty. Mm-hmm. So you would be interested in her. And why? Because she's very pretty.
Yes, exactly. And like at night, like those exiles, maybe those exiles who weren't executed, maybe they come and pull them out of their tent at night. Maybe not. They just run away.
That was a weird seed that you could take out of the episode and it wouldn't change anything. Because what you have is, Fleur and Cass are both sleeping in a tent. And at some point, I guess they get sort of attacked, but not really. Like someone grabs their legs and pulls them out of the tent. By the time they sort of gather themselves and grab their laser gun things, or I guess they're actually just guns. When they grab them,
orange.
Yeah, the people are gone, and there's no real repercussions or effect of this happening. It's just like, oh yeah, that happened, and they're like, well, I guess we better go back to sleep, but be wary.
But be wary. And anyway, the next day they get down to the lake. They find Mitchell there. Mitchell's like,
yeah, because he's only like 2 minutes from town.
Yeah. You can't trust the president. And Flora's like, okay, and then she shoots him in the chest.
Yeah, they have that sort of standoff. He's very angry. He holds the gun on her. And what we're supposed to believe, or as a viewer, is that this was a very hard decision for Fleur. She's not a violent person. She's not someone who wants to use force. But when push comes to shove, she is that person. I think that's what we're supposed to have learned from this scene, that there's more to her than what you just have seen, which is she's pretty.
Yeah, and I guess it is also a show because Cass won't do it because to him Mitchell's such a hero he would never shoot him. So Mitchell's like maybe compromised or potentially has some fear of violence. Yeah,
but you're right. I don't think they did enough to establish who Mitchell is or how people feel about him for that to land very well.
Yeah, and they rescue the kid and they bring him back to town, and you come to realize just like Mitchell's not a main character; he's dead. The wife who he spent so much time caring about is also dead, apparently.
Well, I'm going to give this to the show, though. I was surprised. I didn't look. If you look now on IMDb or whatever, you see that he's only in one episode. I was like, oh, that makes sense. But at the time, I didn't think he was going to get killed right away.
It's because he's from Battlestar Galactica. He seems like he's going to be a lead character. Like, you're like, oh, this guy. I love him on Battlestar Galactica. And then, like, it is kind of that turn of just like, oh, no, he's just going to he's going to kick us off as a villain.
Yeah, and I thought it was pretty good, and I thought he was used well, so I'll give that to the show.
Fair enough. And the show kind of ends on a bit of a cliffhanger as we're sort of seeing the like escape pods crashing down to the Earth. They introduce the final character who we haven't had a chance, the final regular character who we haven't had a chance to meet. Julius Berger. And they're constantly saying how he, not constantly, but they do mention how he worked on the Earth evacuation program. So that's what we need to worry about. And, you know, obviously we both have a little bit slightly different feelings, but I felt like the last line of the show about Julius Berger was an excellent example, was something that was like, I'm like, this is where I think my problem is with the show, is Stella and the president are talking about Julius Berger, how he's coming down to the planet now, and I don't have the lines exactly, but it essentially is like, they're talking about his arrival, and the president says, what do you think this means for us? And Stella says, I don't know.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, great. I'm so excited to find out what you don't know.
The show, for better or worse, and I think probably I'm on one end, or we're somewhere on, the center. We're both on maybe a slight opposite ends of it. The show loves playing in vagueness and uncertainty, and perhaps to its detriment, perhaps to it being maybe a little bit too subtle. It's definitely what they're going for. So whether you like it or not might depend on you as a viewer, but that is what this show is, and I'm only going to assume that that's what it's going to be for the next, I don't know how many episodes, 8 episodes I think it is. You have to just wait, and we'll explain it. But I'm going to mention one odd thing. This might just be me, but Julius Berger and Mitchell Hoban, the two characters, the one who just died, Mitchell, are played by Jamie Bamber and Eric Moebius. They look so similar to me. Are both just sort of, for lack of a better word, sort of generically handsome white men with brown hair that is the same haircut. And it just like, when they started showing Julius, I was like, who is that? Isn't that him? Didn't he just die? I'm like, oh no, it's a different person. They just look exactly the same to me.
We can't have two of them in the show. So one got to be for the first episode, and then now Julius gets to enter.
Give him an eye patch. Give him something.
All right, let's keep going. Here's the IMDb summary for episode 2.
Our birth rate has plummeted in the last year. It's still falling. Women are not becoming pregnant, and we need to do something. And yet the ACs have started to reproduce. This baby could be the key to our future.
Reproduction. That's all it comes down to in the end. Endlessly copying ourselves.
Cass, Floor, and Jack search for survivors from the transport. A young woman is taken hostage. Meanwhile, Stella and Tate are confronted by an old foe.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much. I think that's a better synopsis than the first one. But what you do really learn in the second episode is this is a heavily serialized show, and it's interesting after some of the other shows we've watched. If you are listening to this podcast in order, we just got off Automan, which, different time period for a show, completely different storytelling element that had almost no serialization as TV did. But it is interesting to see the comparison of different generations and different decades of TV. And this show is like, you'll get the answers in episode 7. Just hang tight.
Yeah, it very much whiplash in the storytelling techniques for sure. Like two shows could not be more disparate than Automan and the show.
Yeah, but it does start, and I'm assuming every episode will start with this, with a recap, because it's like you as a viewer are not going to be able to remember everything that just happened. So we'll just tell you again.
Let us catch you up. But the actual episode begins with one of the escape pods landing in the desert, and we find out that somehow, and I could not tell you how this makes any sense, but of all 6 escape pods that landed, they only can't find one of them.
Yeah, and again, I think this is another plot from Earth 2. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they had the same sort of thing, that there's somehow during the explosion, the pods were sent in such vast distances that they're hard to find. They don't have some sort of tracking devices of some sorts, but they were able to find all of them except one. I'm like, it couldn't have gone that much further than all the rest. I would
say that Earth 2 is better at this, because for Earth 2, they're like, there's pods scattered everywhere. So we're going to come across them as we go. And this show is just like, they just announced, they're like, we've already rescued all 5 pods except for one. I'm just like, that you guys don't leave Fort Haven. You have 7 expedition areas. There's zero chance that happened.
Well, the reason what we're going to find is, the reason they've done this is because, of course, Stella's daughter is going to be the one that's missing. And that's not ruining a surprise, because the show does not do a great job of that, because clearly it's got to be her, because there was nothing else for Stella to do or talk about. So if there's a single girl on the ship, it has to be her.
The only survivor of this one pod, Lily, gets off the ship, and you're like, well, that's her daughter.
I mean, there would have been something interesting, and maybe it would have been a very unsatisfying ending to her storyline. But if Lily didn't make it, and all this time she was worrying about it, then Lily died, and it's like, well, what do I talk about now? Now, maybe that doesn't make for the most entertaining television, but it would have at least not been so obvious.
When she gets off the pod, she finds most of the people are already dead, and I maybe they're all dead. There's some indication that some of them were killed later, but basically a group of people appears out of the desert to essentially kidnap her, and these are the I'm going to see if I can get this right, the altered cultivars.
Yeah, ACs. I just referred to them as marauders in my notes, but they're the ACs.
The ACs. And I guess these are genetically altered humans who were designed and sent to planets ahead of time to test them for survivability for the Rego humans to see if they would make it if they got there.
Yeah, and there's implication that, again, shades of other shows we've seen, what was that show that went on forever that we watched? We watched like 65 episodes of it.
Space Above and Beyond.
That's the one, Space Above and Beyond, of the one character, the Tanks, I believe they were called.
Yes.
There's something very similar. This, and then again, like Earth 2, those weird Borg-like Universal Soldier characters.
Well, that was very funny. I'm just like, this part is just like Earth 2.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that they're cribbing from each other. I think it's just that sort of cultural osmosis, regardless of the country, that there's just certain things that are going to show up in these sort of these types of shows. There's just their beats are going to hit.
And there's also an implication in this episode that maybe President Tate was a geneticist and perhaps he was involved in this project. It's not entirely clear, but there's some indication he was involved in genetics back on Earth.
Well, Luke, are you suggesting this show only hinted at something, it didn't come out and tell you?
Can you believe it?
Yeah, because they do have we're jumping ahead a little bit, but when we eventually do meet Julius, he's going to have this vaguely tense conversation with Tate, as a lot of the people have. There's a lot of tense situations, but you don't know why they are tense. You're just sort of assume that because they're tense, they're important conversations. And he will mention sort of offhandedly that he's surprised that Tate is now president because he was, a geneticist of some sort before. That's his background. So that's why it's surprising to him. And that's really all we get is that
and
one
I'm
line
reading
of dialogue.
into the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what we also kind of learned throughout the episode is these ACs, they apparently lived with the settlers for a while when they arrived. That seemed to be the case. Like, settlers arrived, they met up with the ACs who were there before them, and when all the children started dying of C-23, the community decided that it was the AC's fault that the children were getting sick, so the president ordered them executed.
Yes, and this is the first sort of instance we're going to get that Tate might be a bit of a dictator, one argument, or another argument, he's just very decisive, but
a little too decisive.
Yeah, maybe a little too decisive. But yes, they don't. Again, this show, I think this will be a running theme for us having the conversation, is that this show doesn't want to tell you too much. So they don't explain why people felt that way. There seems to be some sort of connection or believed connection between these genetically modified people and what is happening to the people who get the old angel dust.
Angel dust. Mm-hmm. And so this is where Mitchell walked them out into the desert to kill them, decided not to execute them, and they've been living out there ever since, unknown to the rest of the population.
But I have to say, Luke, that is a extreme response. Would you not say? Hey. Let's say you're in we're in this scenario, and you do think that there is a contagious disease or what might have you. You can isolate, you can test, you can, I'm sure there's a myriad of things you can do other than execute them immediately.
Well, and later when President Tate finds out they're still out there, he's just like, oh, wow, I guess we should, maybe reach out to them or something because, it turned out they weren't responsible at all. I'm like, what, excuse me?
Yeah, and we're going to have, again, jumping ahead, nearing the end of the episode, he's going to actually have a conversation with these people. And there's at one point he's like, yeah, well, I guess I should have a conversation with them and, see how they're feeling. It's like, I don't think they're feeling good about it. But he seems almost, I don't know if it's supposed to be a character flaw or if it's just maybe perhaps not the sharpest writing, but he seems incredibly naive about the response to his action.
Yeah, he really is leaning into it's just it was what seemed right at the time, so I had to do it. But I'm also just but it clearly didn't cure the problem, and no one seems to be carrying any guilt in this town that they executed an entire group of people to cure a disease that didn't work.
Yeah, and also, as you mentioned, I think earlier, everyone is very muted and sort of sedate. So his response, they're like, all those people are still alive out there. He's like, interesting. It's like, oh wow. If I had ordered 40 people to death and they're not put together, I'd be like, uh-oh, spaghetti-o.
And I also want to note, so we meet these exiles out there living in the desert, these ACs. There's no discernible settlement. Where are they living?
No, for what they are implying is they don't have anything except the clothes on their back, and they are living in caves. That's what's implied. Because I don't even think, did we even see a tent? Maybe?
No.
Yeah. So though, because we're gonna see later on, they take in I can't remember her name, Susie, the little girl, the
Lily.
18-year-old. Lily, the little girl. She's 18 years old. They take her in, and we later see at one point like it's becoming morning. You see the sun rising, and she's just been sitting in the cave. So it's like that's what they've given her. She doesn't even have a blanket or anything.
It is crazy, and they take her and they're like, we're taking you, and it takes a while to get there. They originally take her and say. And they bring her back to the cave, and they point at a baby, and they say, if this baby dies, you die. And I'm like, what's this 18-year-old going to do for this baby?
Well, that's what's confusing, because I thought there was going to be and this was, again, this show sort of leads you to start thinking of things because they don't explain it, so you try to create the narrative yourself. What I thought it was it was a bunch of men who didn't understand
how to raise a child.
How to raise a child, not because of gender roles, but because of biologically, they just didn't understand, and maybe they thought this baby should be breastfed or something to that effect, and they go, we found a woman, this woman might know. But that's not what this is. What we're going to find is they want the baby to be healed. They know they don't have the facilities or the resources to take care of it, so they're going to use her as a bargaining chip.
Yeah, we'll trade you this Lily for making the baby healthy at your hospital.
Mm-hmm. And should we say now why the baby's so important?
Yeah, it's because you had mentioned it earlier, the idea that like the colonists are not having a lot of luck conceiving children.
Right. They're implying that I think that no babies have been born in quite some time. Now let me ask you, Luke, if you were on Earth in 2060 or thereabouts, and you're creating some genetically modified people that I'm assuming are modified in a way to make them hardier, able to stand up for harsher conditions because you want them to establish a colony so that you can send normal humans there. What would be the reason to make them sterile? Because that seems to be what is there. Because they go, they shouldn't have been able to have kids. I'm like, why? Why would that be a genetic modification? And again, that's part of what I think maybe why I thought it was all men. Because I thought maybe biologically they couldn't have children, and that was why they had taken a child or something, and then they were like, oh, we don't know what to do. I wasn't sure, and again, this show makes you want to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, they leave a little too much open where you're just like, I can't quite suss out what is happening. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the two cops, Cass and Floor, team up with Jack the Expeditionary to go off to find that like one missing escape pod. And they end up, they find it. She's not there. Then they find the ACs in the desert, and the ACs are like, hey, here's our ultimatum. You take this kid. We want the kid healed, and you'll get Lily back. And see if you can explain this to me, because I was baffled. But basically, they're like, they know that Lily is their boss's daughter. So they're like, listen, let's negotiate. What if we gave you 3 hostages in exchange for the baby, and then we could, bring Lily back? That seemed to be the negotiation they were having.
I think it was more you hold them until the baby is better as like if you went to a pawn shop and you left something and go, I'll come back in 3 weeks or something.
So, but the cops actively say, we'll leave you more hostages. And then I thought that meant they were exchanging it for Lily. But then when you cut back, they just now have 2 more hostages and Lily.
Yeah, that is true. I guess I didn't think about that.
I couldn't follow the train of logic of this one exchange, but for whatever reason, basically Cass, Jack, and Lily stay to be hostages while the baby goes back with Floor to be healed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Such a weird show that I'm trying to suss out what's happening so often. Anyway, did you notice that baby's a real baby, right? Why did it look like it had the oldest, it looked like it had that face, that old man mask on from the Wasp Woman?
No, it just was a baby with a old man face.
It just had such an old man face. It really freaked me out. They treat the baby. Somewhere along the way, there's a big scene where the president shows up and takes some cell samples from the baby, so he can he's like, we need these so we can figure out how they're having kids. And but Stella and one of the other characters are so mad at him for taking samples from the baby, and I was just like, did you guys not take any medical samples from a sick child who showed up here that you have to heal? I don't understand what's happening. It's
funny because I think the scene is supposed to add to your unsure feelings as a viewer of President Tate, that he maybe will do whatever he needs to reach the goal or the end game that he wants. But in this one case, it seemed very reasonable. You have a sick child, you need to do tests on the child. To take a sample seems very, very reasonable. So I know they want to have this scene where you're like, is he evil? It's ambiguous. I'm like, I don't think he's evil.
It's similar to that him giving the big standing ovation speech. It's just like, oh, we need a scene where you think he's maybe morally gray. And it's just like, so we'll have him take samples from a sick baby while you're healing him. I'm just like, yeah, but you guys would have already done this.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't, like, you just wanted this scene, but you didn't know how to put it in anywhere.
Yeah, and then we also, we'll find out, as we mentioned before, that, Tate did order the murder of these people. And you have, like, one scene where Fleur and Tate are sort of, she's like, how could you do that? And he's like, my bad.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, I guess.
Yeah, and she's like, okay, accepted.
I also like, because this is around the time where they're like, oh, FYI, those ACs weren't what was responsible for the angel dust disease. And then someone says it's like, yeah, that angel dust disease, it sure felt targeted and more like an attack, And I was just like, excuse me? Yeah. Are you saying aliens are making you sick with this, like, C-23? Like, what does that mean?
Oh, let me ask you this. There's a line, and you probably caught it because you were watching with subtitles. Does Fleur say at one point she sees an alien? She thinks she might have seen an alien?
No, I think what they're talking about is when they were attacked in that tent. They talk about them in such an alien way, like they can't figure out where these people came from. Where I'm just like, it's just so weird. Like, there's always these implications that maybe they're talking about aliens, but I can't tell.
Well, because she says at one point, she makes a point that she was so surprised because they seem to be standing on their legs. And I was like, but I thought it was those ACs that attacked you. Of course they're standing on their legs.
She's talking about the exiles. So I just don't understand either. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. All right. You know what? This will all make sense by the time we get to the end of the series.
I mean, there is the question of, like, maybe there are animals on this planet. I think at some point they do mention it's just like, there are birds, so I assume we'll hear that hawk from Earth 2 at some point, but I was just like, what do you mean there are birds on this random alien planet? What does that mean? Like, how are there birds?
Yeah, it's true. As of 2 episodes, you don't see any animals other than that cloned pig from the first episode. We haven't seen any indigenous animals anyway.
A lot of questions. Anyway, the baby's fixed, all good now.
It had pneumonia.
They take it back to do the hostage exchange, and what we see is Fleur meets basically Rudy with the hostages in a big open field. Rudy's men are armed for this big exchange, and as they're about to do the exchange with the baby, Jack the expeditionary is just like, it's a double cross, we can't trust them, it's a double cross. So him and Cass manage to break free of their bonds. The ACs, are their guns unloaded, or they just not know how to use their guns?
It's a weird scene because, they sort of, we don't need to go over it, but there's sort of scenes you get a few that show that there's tension between these two people and they're not getting along, the captors and the captives.
Yeah.
But yes, there's a scene where we find out that Jack has a hidden knife, so they get into a fight and Cass ends up stabbing a guy, and the metaphor of the blood on his hands is way too obvious, but regardless. There's a scene where one of the ACs has a gun and he doesn't fire it for some reason. He seems very nervous. And I didn't catch what they said, but it seemed as if he didn't know how to shoot, or maybe they couldn't be violent, but that can't be the case because we saw one of them hit a guy earlier. But there's this weird ambiguity about why he doesn't fire his gun and he just runs off. But it might have just been that it was convenient. I mean, I hope it's not just that lazy.
I mean, that's the question. Is basically Jack announces this hostage exchange is a double cross based on nothing, as far as I can tell.
No, yeah,
there's no information.
Well, I think what we're supposed to believe is that because Jack sees the world through his lens of an expeditionary, he's always sort of ready for battle. And when the Rudy puts his hand up as sort of like a hello or some sort of greeting, they see that as a sign that he's telling his men to attack. And so then, thus, they attack. But what's weird about it is you get this thing, they kill one of the...
they kill, the thing, Cass stabs a man to death.
Yeah.
And a man with a gun is standing there and he just runs away.
And what's weird about it is, it doesn't make a bigger fight, and it seems like there's no real consequence. I'm sure it will be later on in the series. But they're just like, oh, well, I guess the deal's good, though. We'll keep the baby?
Well, that's it. They murder the ACs and then they steal the baby. They're the bad guys.
Yeah, they're clearly the bad guys. And it is presented in a way of like, well, that's all resolved now. And I was like, they must know there's going to be repercussions for this. I can only assume the series will show there's repercussions for their actions.
I mean, it has to be, but it's just very funny. It's like, here's a group of people who are taken out to be executed for something they didn't do, managed to survive, asked for help for their baby, and then you murder them and steal their baby.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't look good.
I was like, I think you are the bad guys on this show.
But that's it. Pretty much it for the A plot.
Yeah, well, other than Lily finally makes it back to Fort Haven, sees her mom and says, "I hate you," and then walks away.
Yeah, I did like that though, because I mean, that seemed a true reaction to being stuck on by yourself for 15 years and on a ship for 5, and then your mom's like, "Hey, remember how you used to like play with Barbie?" And it's like, no.
That's true. It was a reasonable reaction. I don't disagree. But you're right. Let's get on to the B plot, which is Julius Berger, who worked for the Earth Evacuation Park program. He's in town now, and there's a lot of tension between him and the president, and I guess Stella as well.
And here's this did feel, and maybe giving it the benefit of the doubt, that they're going to develop his ambiguity, but it did feel like a character that would have been written better on Deep Space Nine.
Absolutely.
Like I think what they're going for is, and forgive me for my constant Star Trek references, but almost a Gul Dukat sort of figure of someone is bad, but also might sometimes play it in the gray area, and you also kind of like him, and you may not know what his motivations are, and he's very clever. That's what I got the sense they were trying to do, and there's this weird ambiguous religion that he is a proponent of and a leader of, but I don't know if the show nails it, either because maybe the guy's performance or because there's just not enough to bite on yet.
Yeah, I think it's a world building issue. I think for this character and in general on this show, because what we'll see is basically he arrives, and the first thing that happens when he arrives is a girl who was on the transport and also survived on an escape pod goes to the police and accuses him of stealing her mother's seat on the escape pod.
Yeah, because again, for some reason, there was only so many seats.
There's only so many seats, so it couldn't do it. And then so Stella, the police chief, goes to Julius and says, "Hey, this woman's accused you of stealing her mother's seat." And he's just like, No. She gave me that seat because I'm so cool.
Yeah, but no, basically what he say is he, for whatever he was before, he now is some sort of, forgive the term, but like religious zealot of some sort. Or at least has had a change of heart, and so now
he found God, or as it's on the show, the universal spirit on the transport over.
Yes, and so people that are his followers sort of look up to him, and his argument is that one of them just gave him their seat because he's more important than they are because of his preaching or whatever it is.
Yeah, he's so cool.
Or he's cool, yeah.
Anyway, and then Estella's like, "Well, if that's true, do you mind doing a deep brain scan?" And he's like, "Pass, no thanks."
Yeah, and she's like, "I can make you." And he's like, "I don't think you can." And she's like, "Touche."
Anyway, the girl's obviously quite upset that this man she views as killing her mother is just wandered around town having a great time. So she goes to hang out with that drug dealer from the first episode, who I realize is going to be a regular character. His name's Tipper Malone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's the Irish guy.
He's the Irish guy. And I guess he's like, they imply he's like some sort of child prodigy who's like, he's a real Wesley Crusher on this. In this world,
they don't give a lot of screen time, but what we're supposed to believe is that he's highly intelligent, and he's sort of a free thinker of sorts. Like he's really into like, let me show you this plant we have, how you can make this into a drug that you can get high over for some reason.
Yeah. And at any rate, this whole scene's just there because she basically will steal a knife from Tipper and then goes to like stab Julius as he's preaching in the town square. But, Tipper stops her from it happening. And as they're yelling at each other over the attempted murder, like she says something that causes Tipper to get a sense that the tension between this 18-year-old girl and this 40-year-old man are maybe a little deeper than he realized.
I think we're supposed to believe she's a little bit younger than that.
Yeah, I think she's like, they're toying with like 16 to 18 is her age range.
I think what they want is you to know it's inappropriate, but it's not so inappropriate that you can't stand the look of that character. You know what I mean? It's like, it's right on that line. I mean, it's already on that line at very best.
Yeah, I mean, later on in the show, they will actually say, like, they'll have a conversation, Julius and this girl, and he will admit to groping and grooming her.
Yeah.
So over the summer, so like, he certainly was, it's a bad look, and I think it's a really, like, I think they think, like, it's not that bad. She's only like 17 and he's 40. Like, that's not terrible, but it's like, honestly, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I think the intention is one thing, but I think as a viewer, at least you and I watching it, it's hard to get past. It's hard to also appreciate maybe other qualities that he has.
Well, and this is sort of the other problem. I think the world building problem I have too is perpetually, much like with Mitchell from the last episode, perpetually other characters will stand around talking about how important and how influential Julius is. He's so important.
Mm-hmm.
People would riot if we charged him with being a sexual predator. We couldn't possibly do any justice on our show. But you don't see that. You don't see him have any influence or have any, no one seems to actually like he holds one prayer session to 7 people.
You're right. Again, and this is something we've probably seen better on other science fiction shows, but there's a weird, I don't know if it's a time issue, but for example, Julius arrives on the planet and there's no scenes of him struggling to adapt, or we never see anything of anyone actually learning how to live on this planet, which they've never been on before. Everyone just like we see him arrive and then he's just cool, everything's normal. And it just seemed weird to me. There was nothing in between. There was no growing pains of, maybe conflict with Tate right away because we see him pushing too hard. They have one conversation and then it's he knows his way around, everything's fine. But you're right, we don't see anything that builds that.
Well, and the ship exploded. We've seen the escape pod, so there weren't a lot of room on there. Arguably, 60 people survived.
Yeah,
and he is presented by Stella and the president as the third most influential person on this planet after us, and I'm just that's impossible.
Yeah, unless for some reason he has gained a following on the ship that has spread out to the planet in some way, but that's not. We have no indication.
He's been there for 4 hours.
Yeah.
It's impossible. And anyway, and the episode kind of comes to a conclusion as they figure out the reason this girl's mad at him is he molested and groomed her as a child.
Yeah.
And no justice is obviously done because he's so powerful. You couldn't possibly do anything. And then Julius confronts the girl at the bar at the end of the show, and they both shake hands and agree never to see each other again. And I don't think we'll ever see the girl's character ever again.
Do you think so?
No, I don't think we'll ever see her again.
Maybe. I don't know. I thought she was going to be a bit of a bit character, but you could be right. But yes, it's weird because Julius is clearly going to be set up as, if not the main villain, an adversary that is going to throw a wrench in the plans of Tate and company. But what is weird about this show is that it wants to play in the gray area so much. And I think it is a flaw of modern television in that there's such a desire for this ambiguity and desire for nuance that you as a viewer don't even know what you're supposed to feel. Because I feel like Tate might be someone I can't support. Julius is someone I can't support. I don't think I can support those ACs. So it's who am I rooting for? Who am I watching? I'm not quite sure at this point.
Yeah, it's so anemic. What the information you have and the acting and the whole thing is so anemic that it's just do I like anyone on this show?
But I'm going to make the argument. I think it's all intentional. Now, I can be proven wrong as we watch the series further. I don't think it's a they didn't have a playbook. I don't think they haven't thought about these things.
I do agree with that.
I think it's all intentional. I just think the execution is making it difficult to know where you stand as a viewer. So as a result, you kind of just gloss over things because you're it's a bunch of characters talking.
They're just kind of sloppy at it.
Yeah, maybe that's a good way of saying it.
Because it's just I get it. You want Julius to potentially be this really problematic third-party leader with a lot of power due to his religious leanings. But then you're oh, and to introduce that, we're going to show how he molested a child. Don't you kind of like him still, though? I'm no, see, that's too far. You can't have that and also bring him back.
Also, I'm going to make it is also a bit of a trope that we've seen in so many other science fictions of there's a leader of a religious faction, but because of power, they're not really a believer of this faith. They're also conniving. And it's just it just seems like I've seen this before. Why not have someone who is religious who isn't nefarious? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's just it. It's from the moment you meet him, it's all a put on. He doesn't believe in any of the religious stuff. So you're why? Why bother?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and you know what would have been more interesting is, I'm saying this now after 2 episodes, is he is, let's say there's a past history with these other characters. Maybe he's someone who's in prison for a long time and has somehow made it to the planet, so they know he's maybe dangerous or has a violent background. But then when he arrives, he starts creating this religion, and they're maybe he's changed, or maybe he's being
Right.
They could have played with it a little more if they just gave it some more time, which is a weird argument and comment to make on a show that seems desperate for you to give them time.
Yeah. I mean, and that kind of wraps up the episode, but I'm going to pause us for one scene that I almost forgot about until I was pulling clips, and I was like, oh, we have to talk about this scene. There is a scene midway through the show where a ghost moves a piece of paper on the president's desk.
Yes. So I think this is, again, a real serialized moment that we're going to explain later, and it's either a ghost or an alien, I'll use the term alien force, or some energy or something that Tate is sitting at his desk, and I assume it's a drawing his kids
Children's
did.
drawing.
And
Yeah.
we just see him sitting there, and it starts moving independently of itself. And he's like, what? And then they don't explain anything.
To cut away. Which I was just like, another Earth 2 thing. There are now ghosts on the show.
What I really hope is they never, ever come back to it.
So fun. I was just like, I forgot about it because like so little happens on this show that it's easy just to like forget what's happening. But I was pulling clips and I'm just like, wait, I forgot there were ghosts on this show.
Yeah, that was weird. Well, we'll see in future episodes if that's a thing.
Well, Jordan, do you want to kind of get into rating these?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give this show a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. I think you and I feel very similar. I think I'm probably a little bit more positive on it than you are. I'm maybe a little more willing to let this somewhat painful subtlety take me into where they want to take me. I'm like, all right, I'll go on this slow journey. So I'll just tell you right off the bat, I feel the same about both these episodes, even though because it felt like it's just one long episode. So I'll just tell you right off the bat, I'm going to give them both 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10 for them both, eh?
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. I mean, I think you hit it at the nail on the head. The thing that I maybe have the biggest problem with, like, it's how, like, these shows are a full hour.
Oh,
like, this isn't 45
You're
minutes.
right. I think they're like 57, 58 minutes.
And they are some of the slowest television we've ever watched.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nothing happens in these episodes.
I would agree with you. And let me just say real quick, I looked at really briefly at when this show came out, some of the reviews, and that was at least a comment I saw several times from some critics, is that it's a slow show.
Languid. It just drags. And what's so funny is, to me, is that pilot on paper is just a classic procedural episode. Someone is murdered and you have to catch the killer.
Mm-hmm.
And if that show was like 44 minutes long, you could have just like ramped the tension up. It could have been like a nonstop chase the killer thing. You could have dropped all the subtle little hints in, and we wouldn't have. You could have had a much quicker, tighter show that was like more procedural, just a detective show trying to find this Mitchell character. And you probably would have got away with more of the subtle hints because there wouldn't have been time to just sit there and have a character be like, well, things are bad on Earth, eh? And then like 30 seconds go by and you're like, and nothing, cutscene.
But again, I think that's I don't think you're wrong about that. This could be a faster, more action-packed show. I don't think that's the show that they want this to be.
Well, they're wrong.
So what are you giving this episode?
I mean, the whole thing feels like it takes place in a vacuum. Like, it's like 8 actors in a stage play who are pretending like there's a lot of people there. So slow, no momentum, no excitement, no emotion. The pilot's bad. It's a bad pilot. Like, I can see why people didn't want to watch this. I'm going to go nicer than I maybe should, but I'm going to give the pilot a 4.
Really? I see. I didn't think it was that bad. I don't disagree with all your points. I just think that they didn't, the negatives of those didn't hit me as hard as it hit you, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, same with the second episode. It's at least they were through the beginning bit and like we kind of established the characters. But if I'm not wrong, if I'm correct about the concept that teenager who Julius was involved with is not back in the next episode, then that means the pilot was all about Mitchell, his wife, and his kid, who are now off the show, and then an entire another episode about a girl who is also off the show, when I have 8 characters I barely know anything about and you won't spend any time with. Like, if this show's just going to be like, bring on a new guest spot every day and I don't get to learn anything about these anemic characters who I can't tell their relationships as it is, it's a problem for this show. I'm going to give it a 4.
No, I think you have a good point. I think the show, and I hope it does, it really needs the characters that they've chosen to focus on. They need them to drive the action because so far they're not. They're just reacting to, as you said, sort of guest stars, and like things are put in motion and they're like, I guess we'll react to it now. But we haven't learned much about these characters. I mean, we've learned a little bit about Tate, and maybe he's ambiguously good, bad. We don't know, but it's in
reaction to everything.
It's been 2 hours, almost an actual full 2 hours, and we need them to kind of push this a little bit. I'll be honest, I don't think we're gonna get too much more momentum in the next 2 episodes.
Yeah, probably not. It is just crazy to me too, because like, barring the first episode, which is a little crazy that we invested all our emotional energy into like Mitchell and his family, and like really none into the other characters. Like, well, let's give that a pass just as a surprise where they were going to.
Well, that's right. That's what they were doing. They wanted to give you that surprise, so they aren't worrying about that you spent all this time developing him. It's like, that's the surprise. He's dead now, and it's like, but you're right. As a viewer, you're like, yeah, but we just have all these other characters we didn't learn about.
But the second episode is about Julius having a inappropriate relationship with a teenager on an episode where another character's teenage daughter also arrives on the planet on the same transport ship, who is uninvolved. Like, it's just like, if you wanted that to, like, I'm not saying that was a good idea to begin with. Like, it's kind of it's a gross idea that I don't think they landed. But why not just build that into the tension between Stella and Lily and Julius? Like,
you're right. They could have done that. Them? It could have been Lily that had been. I know. I feel weird even talking about it because it is a gross storyline of like, but it could have been Lily that was molested by him.
But it is true. Like, we watched a show where they introduced 2 new teenage girl characters who look almost identical already.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, one's a brunette, one's a blonde.
Yeah, that's the big difference between the two of them.
I think there's a bigger difference between them than there is between Julius and Mitchell.
Yeah, I mean, I won't harp on it anymore, but I was watching this and I was just like, so many missteps it felt like. Because you're right, some of the teases, like, I'm just like, I'm okay with it. Like, I'm curious as to the world building backstory, and I'm like, I think they went too subtle. I agree that's on purpose, but I'm just like, perhaps there is something interesting here. I'm like, maybe you guys need to lean into it. It just reminded me, I'm just like, this reminds me of Earth 2 so much, but at least on Earth 2, they didn't like tease you with it. They're just like, there's a Grendler over there. There's this little thing crawling around. It's just like, it's morose at times, but at least it was just like weird and fun.
Yeah. Well, time will tell, and we'll keep watching. I think our average right now is a 5, so that doesn't bode well for us finishing the series off the bat. But let's see where we go.
Episodes. We're gonna finish it for sure. I mean, that's the nice part. It'll be over before it begins.
It'll be over, yeah. There's only 4 podcasts on it. So, I mean, on that note, we're wrapping this up, but we're on to episode 3 and 4, which we should say, none of the episodes are titled. They're all just numbers.
I know, they're all just numbers. It's such a serialized, it's very serialized in that way, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. At some point, they'll have to step on the gas a little and explain some of the stuff that's going on. So, At some point, I'll get some sort of redemption, I hope.
Here's hoping they're not, like, leaving it for season 2. It's not like a, what was that show we watched, the Marvel superheroes?
Oh yeah, Inhumans.
Inhumans, where it's like you realize the whole first season was just a pilot for the second season that never came. I hope it's not one of those.
Yeah, hopefully not. Yeah, well, thanks for joining us, listener. You can find out all the clips from this show on our Instagram and Twitter, @ContinuumDrag. There's going to be spaceships crashing.
There's
going to be ghosts pushing stuff around.
And you unfortunately don't get to see any of the angel dust halos. You just get to hear about them.
They better show me some of this stuff. It's so much telling me things that I'm just like, show me those things. I don't want to hear about them.
Yeah, I don't think this show plays well in 15-second clips on Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good special effects that'll be there.
That's
like
true.
it is a show that's not like, there's not a lot of cool shots, but when there are, like, there's a whiteout, like a big dust storm blows through. There's a few like cool effects. So
yeah, there's a lady dying in a coma.
Yeah, great. Everyone loves that.
We've seen so many comas.
Oh my god. You can email us at continuumdrag@gmail.com if you have any thoughts on whatever.
Yeah, any of these big Outcast fans, let us know what you're thinking.
Outcasters, where are you?
There's like one guy sheepishly putting up his hand. He's embarrassed.
But that wraps it up for this episode. So, listener, we'll see you next week. And also, Jordan and I will see you next week.
Yeah, I'll see you then. Yeah, of course I can.
Bye.
I'll see you then. Bye. Continuum Drag is recorded in Toronto, Ontario. Theme music by James Rex Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.